So in this section, I'm going to talk about the three textual analysis tools. So we've already talked about this. I don't think I have to say too much about it. So what is a media text? Um, and so, I mean, even if you look down here, even a like a theatrical performance or something like that can be considered a text. So even though in this we're talking about popular culture here, and yeah, I mean, if when you go to plays in Broadway, I mean that's popular culture, right? So I mean, and granted, there's many types of media being created, both formal and informal. You know, people are uh, taking videos they're not supposed to be taken, and they put it online. But all sorts of media are being created around those plays. And obviously, for this semester, we're really focusing a lot on fictional content in terms of popular music, popular television, um, mostly. Okay, so and we also have talked about this before. Um, and the importance of media texts are we live in a world of media texts where we're constantly being bombarded. So there's no way that all of us are very much influenced. Like our version of what is this world we're living, and our perception of reality is completely influenced by all these media texts that we're watching all the time. You could take two, and my argument would be you could take two twins from birth and you could separate them, put them in different societies, different cultures, and with lots of different types of media, and you would have two different individuals by the time they're teenagers. Now, and that's a classic social construction. If we look down here, argument. However, today, I mean, those two teenagers might not be totally different. They might be if one was raised by indigenous tribe in Brazil that hardly has any connection to the modern world. Then yeah, very different. But if one was raised in, let's say, Japan, and another one in the UK, the fact is we live now in a global society. You're not maybe not global society so much as a global culture. So in terms of media tech, so through the internet, through the distribution of movies, television, books, there's plenty of texts that span all cultures that are modern cultures. So today maybe those two teenagers might not be completely different. Okay, so in terms of focusing on media analysis, the difficulty sometimes is in that person that of the researcher doing a close reading. So trying to figure out what the meaning of the text is. So as you will read in the chapter on beginner's guide to media analysis or textual analysis, you never would say that there's only one meaning from any particular text, right? Because we've learned from the research that there's people are active readers and people make different meanings of the same media text, right? So therefore, you might say, well, what's the point of media analysis or textual analysis? In textual analysis, you're trying to point out the things, are the symbols, the characters, the narratives, in a more kind of objective type way. Right, so for me to say that the dragons in Game of Thrones symbolize, a nation like developing a military weapon, is not too much of a stretch because that's literally what happens in the film, right, or in the television series. Is Daenerys goes from someone without any type of power, and then all of a sudden creating help and discovering these dragons and helping the dragons to grow. And the author of the book and the directors are intentionally creating the dragons as a symbol to show people, she is growing in power. Her dragons are growing, and she is growing in power, and that's pretty much also literally happening in the television series. Is her dragons are gaining in power, and she is gaining in power in part because, or largely because of the dragons. And the other things that are being done in the film series to create meaning to get people to react are very intentional, like the use of I'm sorry, the use of music to create tension, to develop scenes and feelings and emotions, and the use of violence, the use of nudity. They're not like, I mean, these people know what they're doing, right? So you really want to focus when you're doing your media analysis on describing what you really see. And also when we get to political economy, how those things that are happening are conventions of that genre. Okay, so I just want to talk about what is text analysis and what is it not. So it is a humanities tech methodology. So you will see if you took a course on film studies or literary studies, and you probably see this in classes you've taken on literature. The professor is asking you to look and read the text carefully, and what do you see? Like how are what are the conventions of meaning making in this book, and what is the author doing to evoke your emotions, and what kind of symbolism is the author trying to derive in that text. So it is, and one thing I'm going to be urging you to do all semester long is you're not just going to be relying on your own interpretation. You're going to be combining it with historical and cultural analysis of where the text was created, how the text was created, genre analysis, and audience fan analysis as well. So you're not just going to be like saying, oh, this is what I see in the movie and leaving it at that. What textual analysis is not is it's not a type of content analysis. This is discussed in the chapter as well on Beginner's Guide to Text Analysis. And content analysis is where a group of researchers would choose a whole group of texts. So let's say I would choose newspaper or 3 television news programs, and over the course of the year I would get recordings of all of them, and I'm going to decide to see how many times do they mention the pandemic, how many times do they mention let's say maybe like a particular group of people, and count how many times they do it. This was common in 1970s and 80s, where they were able to show that, for example, how African Americans were used, or what type of characters they played in mainstream television, and by far African Americans were going to be depicted as criminals or victims of crimes, as opposed to playing leading roles, as opposed to being police officers or detectives or heroic type roles. And in part, the industry started to listen to some of these researchers, pointing out, well, there's lots of stereotypes used in certain types of role that you're putting certain people in, and the industry was slow to change, but slowly it did, at least to a certain extent. It's not data analysis, so there's data analysis like where you're looking at data like a computer would look at data in computer science, and that's not it as well. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 tools, and again, I'm just saying that they're tools, and any type of pop culture analysis you do might focus on 1 or 2 of these more than another, or any text you have might lend itself to using 1 or 2 of these and not all of them. So it's not like they're tools. So if I have the job I need to do, I'm going to grab 1 tool or 2 tools, and not every single tool in my toolbox. And again, I want to get into, before I talk about them, is at the bottom here. So semiotics and psychoanalysis that I'm about to talk about are going to really focus on a reading of the text itself, so the message itself. So it's really 1 and 2 here. And then the political economy and genre analysis we're going to talk about later are really looking at how industry standards and industry practices go into creating like deciding what the text ends up being. And it can really lead back to number 1. So, for example, the idea in Game of Thrones that there would be a lot of violence and nudity on HBO is not like unintentional. It's very intentional, right? So, and those are aspects of industry standards and practices that go back into it. Okay, so semiotics. For this, I really just want you to focus on looking for symbolism. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about go to the basics of semiotics. And semiotics as kind of an academic discipline is looking at how we make meaning in language. Okay. So there is a kind of a whole linguistic side of it that isn't necessarily the semiotics analysis we're going to be talking about here. Um, and so a sign is any kind of construction in language that's trying to convey meaning. And it's both words, so we do that with words, and we do that with physical symbols. Okay, so in our culture, so that would be graphics and media, um, and but also again language. So in this graphic here, this whole thing is the sign. The sign is the meaning, and then the conveyor of meaning coming together. So the signifier that's carrying the thing carrying the meaning is when I say tree. Okay, I say tree. Okay, the signified is what am I talking about? Okay, so I'm talking about there's things out there. I'm looking through a window. There's lots of them in my backyard. Right now, they don't have leaves. Okay, you all have English as one of your languages. Maybe for some of you, it's not the only one, but for some of you, it is. And so when I say tree, you know the meaning. Okay, if I go to some place where someone doesn't know English, I say tree, they don't have the knowledge of what signified comes with that signifier. They might hear, oh, they hear what I'm saying, tree, but they don't know the signified that goes with that signifier. It's a little confusing in this graphic because we have a graphic of a tree here. Okay, so the graphic itself could be a sign also. So I could just put the picture of a tree in here, a little graphic of a tree. That would be a sign. Okay, and the graphic itself would be the signifier, but you would know the signified. The signified, it's talking about those things out there. We love to have lots of them because they help with global warming to convert carbon dioxide to oxygen. Here is another one, and so we have the objects. Okay, I actually have one of them sitting over here, curled up on the couch, and so that's what it's talking about. Okay, we have the symbol. The cat's name is Yojo. Okay, so when I say Yojo, like if I just said that to you all, you don't know what the concept is. Okay, because you don't know that it's the cat. Okay, but if I say Yojo to my daughter, she's like, oh, thinking about, oh, it's the cat that we're talking about over here. Okay, and this diagram also kind of helps to represent that the concept can also come with other things. Okay, so if I put a cat uh, in a commercial, okay, there's lots of kind of cultural baggage. So when I talk about, so if we were in class, I would ask, okay, what is, when you see a cat, not just talking about the cat itself, but what does that usually symbolize? And usually students will say, oh, sometimes it could symbolize bad luck. Sometimes independence, because cats are supposed to be kind of flippant and independent. Um, and cats used to be used to describe like stereotypes of female behavior. So they say, "Oh, that woman is catty," almost as a put down or as a like an unfair stereotype in culture, right? Which basically means that person is independent, which women were not used to supposed to be, right? And would give their opinion, right? So that kind of idea of being catty was a pejorative aspect of using cats to symbolize something. There's a commercial that sometimes I would show, and it has a big cat for actually for like a sports car, and all of a sudden in the commercial, this black sports car briefly morphs into like a large black panther. So larger cats, those type of wild cats, are used to as symbols of power and independence. Okay, so the cat in terms of symbolism is not always negative. It all depends on what culture has used it for. So in semiotic textual analysis, we're looking for different types of symbolism. And symbolism is intentionally used to create meaning inside of a text. So in a movie or TV storm, if there's a or TV series, if a storm is brewing, okay, it usually symbolizes rising tension and conflict happening and bad things about to happen. So and you see that all the time. Like there's a battle or fighting happening, or a storm is coming, and then you know that a lot of conflict is about to happen. So a lot of it inside of texts are very intentional, and that's certainly the case in the Game of Thrones with the dragon symbolizing the growing power, and also the growing fury and violence of Daenerys Targaryen. And then you can also, in this area, you look for how characters plot, even music, events, settings can help to symbolize certain things. So let me show you a quick clip.
Symbols have been around for thousands of years. Ranging from Egyptian hieroglyphics to company logos, symbols have expanded quickly. There are countries all over the world that share the same symbols. It's as if symbols consist of a universal language that everyone can understand. A symbol is something such as an object, picture, written word, or sound that represents something else by association or resemblance. For example, when you're driving on the road and you see this, what are you supposed to do? That's right, stop. I'm here to talk to you about symbolism in film. Symbolism in film is very similar to that of the arts, only film has a much broader range. It's the artistic method of revealing ideas or truths through the use of the story, color, sounds, objects, and effects. Let's break it down. Storylines, when it comes to symbolism, has a wide range of categories. Whether it's the characters we fall for or the wonderful locations used in the film, some movies go in-depth to express meaning. Just look at the movie The Matrix. It's about a character named Thomas A. Anderson who is living a double life. One, working for a highly respectable software company, and two, a hacker under the alias Neo. The Matrix follows the progression of Neo going from regular guy to being exposed to the real world. A series of unusual events brings him into contact with a group of people led by Morpheus. Morpheus feels Neo is the chosen one, the one who will set everyone free from the Matrix. Let's take a look at the main character, Neo Anderson. If we took his nickname Neo and performed a little anagram on it, we would get the word one, meaning the chosen one. Neo also means new in Greek. Anderson, Ander, meaning man, and son, which is son. Jumble these words, and you get new son of man. In classic mythology, Morpheus was the god of dreams. In The Matrix, Morpheus constantly talks about dreams. Zion, the place that is home to those living in the real world, is based off of Mount Zion, which is located in Jerusalem. Knowing all of this information, we can piece together that The Matrix is based off of the Bible. Neo representing the chosen one who will save all the people of Zion. Let's take a look at color. Color plays a huge role when it comes to movies, whether it's what the characters wear or the look of the film. Look at superheroes. The costumes that they wear symbolize their true meaning. Batman wears a dark suit to symbolize a bat. Captain America and...
Okay, so we will stop the... So if you want to go find that clip and watch the rest, you can. So notice how, in order to look at the symbolism and do a good reading, I mean, you really have to know a whole lot about the text, right? So if I just watched The Matrix, and didn't know that about Morpheus's name, and wasn't knowledgeable about the Bible and knew about Mount Zion in Jerusalem, there's a lot of preparation that you really need to do, and some research to really get at all that symbolism. And that's why usually when you're doing a reading like this, like you would be watching that movie many times, looking at how others have talked about the movie or whatever it is the text you're looking at. Okay, so and we'll come back to this more. There's also what I'm going to talk about is looking for symbolism um, of symbols in the text that are symbolic of things going on in our culture or the culture of when the text was created. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so let's talk about psychoanalysis. So, and that's little Freud dissecting big Freud there. Um, so psychoanalysis, like if you take a course in psychology, then you would read about Freud. It's not really as the basis of the idea of sitting down and talking to someone to kind of understand who they are and especially any kind of emotional or behavioral problems they're having. And his theories were kind of created or he thought that there were more deep connections than we kind of think about really happening today. And so it's not really the way that they were doing. It's not really respected as a therapeutic model, except for the idea of sitting down, listening to someone, and talking to them about their life and the impact of different aspects on their lives, on their psychological, well-being and their ways of behaving. But what psychoanalysis can help us do in textual analysis is help us to pay attention to the psychology happening within a text, and in particular for the characters. So their impulses, their emotions, their ways of behaving. And so in particular, in this area of analysis, you want to look at them as emotional beings and how their emotions are maybe characteristics or caricatures, cliches, sometimes stereotypes of their gender, race, and sexuality in particular, and how these things are being played out in their emotional behavior. So, in Game of Thrones, there are lots of powerful, strong female characters, right? So, if I'm kind of thinking about that and looking at that in the narrative itself, that would be an aspect of psychoanalysis. And then also family relations as well, and cliches or deviations from family norms and what the family relations in the text might be telling us. Okay, so political economy, and so I've had students who kind of get stuck on that term, political economy, and I could just change it and call it, I think, media and genre analysis, because the students get caught up in I think, the political aspect. And political economy is a kind of humanities research methods of looking at how kind of politics, and that's not with a capital P, but like people's relationship with each other on a grander kind of social setting, and also finances, economics kind of impact things. And this, for our purposes, political economy analysis, really you want to look at lots of different contexts of the production of the text. So if we look at the bottom here, think about the genre and the conventions of that genre. So for Game of Thrones, fantasy television, high budget, epic fantasy, and what are the cliches there? What are the things that audiences might expect from those type of shows, and therefore the directors and the writers are going to put into those type of shows. So again, we're talking about violence, nudity, epic settings, fantasy aspects, like having the dragons in there. Granted, it's coming from a book, but they decided, oh, these books would make great television, right? And we have like the Night King and like the Frozen Walking Dead, basically, and so when they're thinking about, oh, we're going to take these books and put them into a television series, I mean, they were thinking about that genre of kind of epic fantasy television. We're also thinking about who are the target demographics. We're thinking about how much money is put into it. One thing that, and then we're also talking about the kind of intra politics of the show. So you might ask yourself, why did the directors want to kind of end the last season real quickly, and what are the kind of politics of the actors and the directors and the production company who's spending all the money that went into that decision. So again, this is kind of political economies reminding us to really look into the industry and how that impacted the creation and what was put into the text, and also how people receive the text. Okay, so lastly, what I want to do is I just want to give you kind of an example because I sent that video out talking about Games of Thrones and my analysis on monster theory, and so I thought it would be useful since I already talked about it. If I talked about Game of Thrones, kind of an analysis using the three tools. Um, Okay, so start with political economy and how money issues and industry pressures impact the production of the story. And so, in the nudity thing, especially the early part of when they were putting it out, and lots of sex scenes, and we could talk about the same thing with violence. Okay, and granted that Game of Thrones was, with all the strong characters, was talked about kind of buckling the trends in terms of having a lot female characters be weak or cliched, stereotype in a negative way because we have all these strong female characters. But at the same time, people pointed out in terms of all the nudity in Game of Thrones, there's a lot more female nude scenes than there are male nude scenes, which would conform to like the general heteronormative outlook on society. So very much a calculated, and it would be difficult to say millions of people are watching this because of the nudity, but it's well known that to drive audiences, that's one thing that you can do. Okay, and then there's other areas that you can go into. So the economics of the TV series and how they impact storytelling. You could let's go back. And you could talk about like I said, the political issues, looking into the pressure that why they ended the series so quickly. Usually, you would look at where the money is coming from. Certain types of production pressures might lead to certain things happening. Like I said, like the nudity and the violence. And there's lots of information. So usually, if I had you do this, this would be the area. Like if I had you required you use all three of the tools in a media analysis or a pop culture analysis, the one where you're doing the most research, kind of in terms of numbers and industry, would definitely be the political economy. Okay, so psychoanalysis looks at the narrative and character portrayals first, and then second asks what it might say about the society of the text creation. So certainly kind of any issues of gender or race or sexuality in the story, think about how that plays out in the narrative, and that kind of what that comments on the society. So sometimes they're cliches. So you're whatever the cliches of the role of women are in that particular society of when the text was being created, you see those played out, and certainly that happens out in a lot of like sitcoms and like typical like network television of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. They were all kind of just validating the culture as it is. So lots of like housewives, and the man goes out and comes back to work, and like very like non-controversial way of portraying society, right? Like trying to reflect the society with the mainstream aspect of society back on itself. But if you see any buckling, and that's certainly something that should be commented on, when stereotypes or cliches are happening in the narrative, but also any kind of deviation, like in Game of Thrones, we have these really strong female lead characters. And then look at the psychological challenges of the characters and the stories. In Game of Thrones, there's a lot of emphasis on outcast type characters. So Jon Snow is a bastard, right? Now, from one perspective, you can say, yeah, well, he's also kind of somewhat of a classic, white male lead. But in the books, and then also certainly in the television series, effort is made to cast him as an outcast because of his bastard status in that society. And the same thing with Tyrion and Danny, and lots of other characters as well, different types of outcasts. Um, Look at for any issues with family ties in the narrative. So we have the Starks with the Lannisters. The Starks are kind of the more classic pro-social, like strong, super strong family connections and emotional connectors. In the Lannisters, we have strong family connections, right? Because you're only supposed to do it for the house, right? But at the same time, they treat Tyrion like crap. And then of course we have the incest with Jaime Lannister and Cersei Lannister, um, and the father who kind of only wants his children to perform for the house and really has no love for them. And when you're doing this, obviously look at the narrative, look at what you see, but also you have to do more research too. So you would have to look in and see that, there's interviews with George Martin talking, the writer of the books, talking about how he wanted to write strong female characters into the books because he wanted to challenge and kind of buckle the trend because he's also a big reader of epic fantasy book series. And before Game of Thrones, you really didn't really see a lot of strong female characters, and there are lots of them in his fantasy book series. And then you also have interviews with the directors of the films talking about how they really wanted to focus on that as well. Okay, so semiotic analysis, we are looking at the symbolism. Okay, so and you want to look at the symbolism, and I just put this here. So this is a Godzilla and an atomic blast happening, and just because there's been lots of written about Godzilla symbolizing the Japanese cultures kind of trying to grapple with the devastation that happened with the nuclear bomb, and so recognizing that Godzilla symbolizes all that intense power to that you want to that can both protect but also devastate at the same time. So in semiotic analysis, we want to look at the symbolism in the text, so A here, but then after, so what symbols in the text symbolize other things in the text, but then also how symbols in the text can symbolize aspects of our own culture. So first here we have dragons symbolize Daenerys' growing power and fury in the story. Okay, so symbolizing something in the narrative, in the story itself, but also similar to Godzilla, symbolizing military technology in the 20th century, at the time when, and thinking about what George Martin's generation is. He's in his 70s now. And there's others we could go into. We could talk about like the symbolism of the Night King. We could talk about Arya and the Faceless Men and what they symbolize. In the text, it kind of symbolizes her desire to get away from all the duties that she would have as a woman who's the son or the daughter of a lord, and the responsibilities of her house. She didn't want to be a typical like female aristocracy, and so her ability to change. And in fact, in the narrative, she kind of also has to do that because the fact that she's a Stark puts her in more danger. So she has to change her identity, and she kind of develops a sense of power around that. But then we can think about how that symbolizes, what does that symbolize today? Well, think about like social media and the web allowing people to change their identities all the time. And in the other video I talked about, we could talk about what the symbolism of the diversity in Dany's army, how we can project that onto our society. Other powerful images, in the Game of Thrones are the poverty of the common people, the callousness of the elites, the violence used as a normal aspect of ruling. Okay, so those are the three tools. And one question that I thought might arise would be, well, can you go too far looking for symbolism and reading into the text, and you can. So that's why you really, even I mentioned that political economy might be the area that you do the most research, but in a good analysis, you're doing research for the semiotics and the psychoanalysis as well to learn more about the creation of the text, and the different things that the author has or directors have put into it, and why, and that helps you to understand the symbolism and understand the characters, and their emotions and behaviors in the text. And so I'm just giving an example here, because I was thinking about the wall, and I was thinking, well, yeah, you could easily say that the wall, which is a gigantic wall that was built in Game of Thrones, like, and it's like, it's ancient. A lot of people don't really know, like, exactly who built it. It's so old, right? But they know that it was built to keep out the wildlings and maybe the Night King, which was kind of considered to be a myth at the beginning of the series. And you could look at it and you could say, oh, well, that kind of symbolizes the wall on the Mexican border, right? And without doing the research, you wouldn't realize that what it undoubtedly symbolizes is Hadrian's Wall, because George Martin was writing about, or intentionally using a lot from British history, and writing about some of the feudal lords that kind of warred right around the time when the status of the king of England was first being kind of implanted, and the lords had a lot of power, and so the Starks and the Lannisters represent the different sides of the War of the Roses in British history. And the wall very much symbolizes Hadrian's Wall, which was built right around the present time border of Scotland to keep out the Celtic tribes that they were warring with, right? So it's very much like symbolizing that and based on that, right? So but without reading and doing more research on George Martin and why, what he put into his books, you wouldn't realize that. Now, I think it's possible if in doing, and I'm just saying it's potentially possible, but let's say, 10 years from now, I'm doing audience research or doing an audience study. It's possible that for people who are children of today, and then later on, when they're teenagers in their 20s, they watch Game of Thrones, for them, it might kind of symbolize the wall on the Mexican border, because right now is the time when they're children and they're hearing lots about it, right? And in the series, at first people are not making fun of the wall, but saying it's just keeping out the wildlings, and the wildlings are very much othered, right? Even though they're genetically, and certainly there's been kind of interbreeding and, between the people who live on the other side of the wall, like the Starks and the other feudal lords. But it's keeping those people out, and they're very much othered. And in the film, we start to realize, well, the Spilings aren't really any different than these other people. They just live in a kind of a different culture, and they just want to survive just like the people on the south side of the wall, right? So, from that perspective, and they're also very much vilified, to the point where, that some people vilify people who live on the other side of this wall here. So, I mean, for that generation, maybe that comes to be symbolism that happens, okay? Right now, I don't think it's really there. So just, because there's a potential of seeing this could symbolize that, you do have to kind of do some more research to see if that seems to really play out or not. Okay, so I'm just going to end here. As I said at the top, my conclusion is a good analysis pulls from many different sources. So you're not just going to have, and all of them take a lot of work. And each one of them involves its own type of research. So when you're doing your narrative and character analysis, which again focus on symbolism and looking at relations and emotion psychoanalysis, you're going to be looking at the text many, many times and really thinking about it, do a really close reading, and then you're going to have to find other resources on the author and how the text was created to kind of see to what extent you feel like your observations there, your close reading is valid. Um, and then and in fact, part of that means you probably would, before you really kind of pin down your symbolism and your psychoanalytic analysis, you would want to have already done a fair amount of research on political economy and genre type research in terms of the industry and the genre, the conditions under which the text was produced, and it's much about the directors and authors. And there's lots of stuff out there about these shows. They're popular culture shows. They're things, whatever it is, if it's a song or an album or a movie series, a film, there's millions and millions of people who have watched this and who have commented on it. There are journalists who have written about it. So it's not like you're out of the blue. I mean, if you chose some really obscure album or show or book, then it would be more difficult. But in this popular culture analysis, these are popular media texts in our culture, so there will be lots written about it. So you would have probably done this first, or at least help that to decide about your help you to feel like your observations in the semiotics and psychoanalysis are valid, and help you to write it up and make those connections. And then you would also integrate a fan or audience analysis that we're going to talk more about later, which is mostly just going and finding fan sites and where people or where groups or individuals are talking about their relationship and identity and what they think about that particular text.